I was in my home office filling out an invoice for one of my clients when I heard the front door open. I usually call out to my wife, Christine, to say hello and let her know I'm home. I delayed because I was halfway down the page entering itemized expenses and didn't want to lose my place. This delay has served me well. Hey girl, Jerry isn't home, is he? I recognized the voice. It was Sandra, our neighbor, and one of Christine's closest friends. She must have seen Christine come home and come. No, his car is not in the driveway or in the garage. He said that he had some business today. What's happened? My wife answered, walking into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator door open. I was at home without a car, only because it was being repaired. The dealership gave me a ride home since it was closer than my regular office. I often worked from home, so it was just as good for me to work here as it was in the city center office. Great, do you want to have fun today? Sandra asked. Do you want to have fun today? Sandra asked. Do you want to get your share of sex? Now it has my full attention. I completely forgot about that bill. Reaching for my phone, I began recording the conversation. Christine giggled. I would love to, but it's too hasty. I'm not sure I can break free. Jerry said something about us going out to dinner. I decided to relax and drink a glass or two of wine. My home office was a converted room next to the kitchen. I turned off the desk lamp and turned off the computer monitor. The door was slightly open, and I didn't want one of the women to realize that I was eavesdropping. I heard the clink of glasses. They were too busy getting their wine glasses out to hear me. Come on, help the girl. Tammy was supposed to be my friend today, but her mom called. She was sick with some kind of stomach issue, so Tammy had to go and help her, Sandra said. We had a double date with Eric and Rich. Tammy was the third member of the trio. They started calling themselves the Three Amigos in college. Sandra and Christine attended the same high school. Tammy joined them during her freshman year of college. They lived in the same room most of the time in college. I always suspected that they shared more than just an apartment. I met Kristen while in college, and we started dating during my senior year, so I knew both Tammy and Sandra well. Both women had the sex drive and moral qualities of minks. Both would have sex in no time. If they liked the guy even a little, they would give themselves to him on the first date. They both suggested that I try it several times. I refused because I was with Christine. Christine was much more reserved, the most cautious of the group. By no means a prude, but not a lecher either. At least that's the impression I got while we were dating and throughout the 7 years of our marriage. Frankly, before we met, she was quite active sexually, but after that she was always faithful to me. In all the time we were together, I had no reason to doubt her until this moment. After hearing this conversation, I realized that my trust in my wife's fidelity was completely misplaced. Sandra was in her third marriage. Neither she nor her first 2 husbands could refrain from fornication. This, of course, applied to her first husband. He would get any girl who would stand still for a long time. The second husband started an affair after he caught Sandra with a work colleague. I thought it was justified because he had already filed for divorce. Of course, Sandra claimed it was cheating. According to her twisted logic, she could do whatever she wanted, but her husband had to be faithful. I liked her current husband. He worked in the same company as me. As a service representative, he had to travel out of town a couple of times a month. He was a hard worker and a friend. He met Sandra at a party when I invited him to my house. He and Sandra had been married for just under 2 years. As soon as the house on the next street became available, they bought it. Tammy never married. She was engaged several times, but each time she was a coward. I suspected that she needed freedom more than a husband. She joked that variety is the spice of life. You know how much I want to go with you and have a lot of fun. But I love Jerry, Christine said. I don't want to spoil what I have with him. And what? Just because you love him doesn't mean you don't deserve to have a little fun, Sandra said. These guys are just a stress reliever. They, of course, do not pretend to be anything long-term, just toys. I take it Bob is out of town, asked Christine. Sandra replied that yes, see you tomorrow. So she wanted to go get a little today. You mean get a lot, Christine giggled. I bet they take Viagra every time they go on a date. No man I know can last as long as they do. So why do you need me today? Asked Christine. If you don't go, I'll have to choose either Eric or Richard, and whoever stays will be furious. My problem is to escape, Christine said. I usually just go with you and Tammy when Jerry goes to fish camp. He thinks I don't like sitting there in the swamp, and sometimes I like it, and I'll probably have to give up these boy toys soon. We're talking about having a baby. None of these guys are enough like Bob for me to take the it, and I'll probably have to give up these boy toys soon. We're talking about having a baby. None of these guys are enough like Bob for me to take the risk, and they refuse condoms. Okay, how about this? You tell Jerry that Tammy just broke up with her last boyfriend, which is true, by the way. She's worried about this, so we have to go to her and console her. Maybe drink some wine and just have a bachelorette party. It will also give you an excuse to stay up late or even not come home until the morning. We'll take my car and say we're too drunk to drive home. Tammy will support us. You're going to pick out a hot little dress, grab your heels, and take it to my house before Jerry gets back. Then you will leave here in normal everyday clothes and change at my place. Jerry sits here and doesn't suspect anything. Leave my husband alone, you slut, Christine laughed. You should be a happy married woman now, remember? Besides, I don't want to share Jerry, Sandra giggled. You share all of yourself with other men, but you don't want to share your man, right? No, was the answer. I wouldn't want to share Bob either. I'm woman enough to give him everything he'll ever need and still have some left over for my boys. Then let's get your clothes and things together and take them to my house before Jerry gets back. Otherwise, we're screwed. More precisely, nothing shines for us. I waited, sitting in the darkness of my office and thinking about what I had just heard. My supposedly faithful wife cheated on me with at least these 3 guys and 2 of her girlfriends. Who knows how many more there were before them? I waited until they returned from the bedroom. Let me look outside first to make sure Jerry isn't driving up, Sandra said. Okay, the coast is clear, let's. I heard the front door open and close. I headed to the back door and circled around the house. I watched as Christine and Sandra turned right toward her house, 2 houses down the street. As soon as they were out of sight, I quickly turned left. Before I could reach the next block, I was already dialing my brother's number. Everything inside me was seething with anger. Yes, just half an hour ago, I loved Christine with all my heart. We even talked about starting a family. What I heard turned my feelings upside down and filled me with rage. I dialed the number and called my brother. Holy shit, dude, Jason stated when I explained the situation to him. I didn't even know they were doing such things. Tammy is a real hottie. You know I entertained her several times before I met Sue. I kept wondering who else she could be. Sandra was also a wild card. So what are you going to do? Jason has known girls almost as long as I have. I asked him to pick me up. When he picked me up 20 minutes later, the dealership called and said that the car was ready. I asked him to take me there. Let's go to the grill and have a beer. A few guys will meet us there. Jason said as I walked outside after paying the bill, I didn't feel like drinking, but Jason told me to be strong and be there. I'll take care of you. I followed his advice. I knew both the guys waiting for us. They were mutual friends of my brother and me. They would have covered for me. One of them went through a divorce several years ago. He told me how bad it was, but then he laughed and repeated the old joke about why divorces are so expensive. They're worth it. I told all 3 of them that I really didn't have much to lose in the divorce. We only bought our house 3 years ago, so we had almost no equity. I was focused on paying off my college loans as quickly as possible, so we only had a few thousand in savings and accounts. Christine made almost as much as I did as a consultant selling medical products. Child support was not an issue, and neither were the children. I wanted revenge, scorched earth. I wanted to find these bastards and cause them as much harm as possible. I had no idea who they were. Having laid out my goals, the 3 men began to grin. We can do this, Don said. We're going to the bar, or wherever they're going. I'll keep an eye on the bastards and find out their car license plates. You know, my brother is a policeman. I can find out who they are. Do you happen to have the Find My Phone app on her cell phone? Aid asked. I nodded. Christine always left her phone somewhere. Usually all I had to do was call it and hear it ring. But sometimes he ended up in her car. For someone who needed it so much for her job, Christine was very careless. Without thinking twice, I decided to wait and see if I could get information from her phone. Damn it, Guy, Don said, chuckling at my statement. You don't give your wife any slack. To my future ex-wife, I corrected him. Jason and Ed called their wives and said they needed to help a friend tonight, and they would explain everything later. Don was still lonely. He was still too shy to have a permanent girlfriend. How big are these guys if it comes down to it? Ed asked. I just want to know if I need to have an expandable baton on hand. I told him I had a baton and would carry it with me, but I wasn't going to stand there long enough to get in trouble. I was going to tell them they were caught, take some pictures, and get out of the Dodge. If Don can follow the guys and get their numbers, that'll be enough for us. Yes, a fight can ruin today's mood. A shootout would have been even worse. I knew Ade shared the same philosophy as Jason, Don, and me. Never start trouble and leave if you can. But before you let yourself get your ass kicked, you'll blow up another motherfucker. Hey dude, do you mind if I stop by Kristen's place later? Ed asked, grinning. As far as I understand, you won't have to wait. I'm already done with her, although you might have to borrow her boyfriend's sloppy seconds today. I chuckled in response. The only thing is, no matter how good she is, I'm not sure she's worth it to be your last sex. You know Melody won't leave you alone once she finds out. Don and Jason laughed. Their jokes made me feel a little better. Leaving all three of us to prepare for the evening, I went home. Before I could get home, the phone rang. It was Christine. Hi, baby, she began cheerfully. Look, I know we talked about going out to dinner tonight, but something came up. Tammy is all upset. I think she broke up with her last boyfriend and she needs to talk it out, Kristen began. I asked her if he caught her with another guy. She paused in surprise. I don't know why. She's just very upset. She thought this guy might be the one. I laughed at this. I couldn't help it. She's just very upset. She thought this guy might be the one. I laughed at this. I couldn't help it. Seriously, she's upset. Sandra and I are going to go to her house and sit with her. Maybe we'll drink a bottle or two of wine. Everything you need. We just want her to know that we care about her. You don't have problems with this, do you? I would never have a problem with someone taking care of a friend who needs it, I said. It is difficult to build strong relationships, the kind where there's someone you trust who knows he's got your back and is always looking out for you. Christine seemed to pause, or it seemed to me. Thank you, darling. I'll be out in a few minutes. I told her that I would be home by myself in a few minutes. She was still there when I arrived. Aren't you gonna take a bag with you in case you stay? I asked when I returned home and saw her with only her purse. For example, would you and Sandra drink too much to drive safely? She stuttered and said that she had a toothbrush in her purse. Yes, I think if it's just you three women there, you can sleep naked, I laughed. She blushed beautifully. She walked out the door. I hurried to my room to take off my suit and change into jeans and a shirt suitable for going to the bar. I needed a shirt that could be worn untucked because I had the gun clipped to the waistband of my trousers on the right side. I put my telescopic baton in the right back pocket and my wallet in the left. I hoped that I would not have to use either weapon, but if it came down to it, I would rather hurt someone than get hurt myself. An arrest would have been inevitable in any case. I called my brother Jason. He hurried home himself as soon as we left the bar. He swapped cars with Don to avoid being recognized. I walked out the front door and moved left again. Jason caught me. We drove around the block and stood on the street from where we could watch Sandra's house. We hoped they hadn't left yet, but to be honest, we thought the women would need time to get ready. After an hour of sitting, we both felt bored and sad. According to the Find My Phone app, Sandy still had it, but I wondered if she had forgotten it. I decided to call Christine. Hey, I said when she answered. How is Tammy doing? She paused. I didn't give her time to think. Pass her the phone and let me talk to her. I'll cheer her up a little. Maybe I'll introduce her to one of the guys in the office. I helped Sandra. She and Bob look quite happy. We're not there yet, Christine answered. Sandra and I are still at her house. I asked her why they took so long to leave. Sandra had a few calls to make first, and we wanted to talk a little before we went to Tammy. Christine answered calmly, We'll leave here soon. Are you still at home or have you already gone out to eat? Sorry, I didn't have time to prepare something for you, no. Jason came and picked me up. We're going to grab something to eat and maybe have a drink or two since you'll be late if you get home at all tonight. There was relief in her voice, and she told us to take it easy. I suspected that she was afraid that I would walk to Sandra. It would be very difficult for them to explain why they were half-dressed or fully made up, with slutty makeup, perfume, or sexy lingerie. If I stood at the door, they wouldn't be able to change quickly enough without being caught. I hung up. Jason grinned. Fun with them, right? Then he became sad. Of course, it's a shame that it all came to this. I nodded, but said that at least now I know so I can cut my losses and move on with my life. So there's no way you're going to try to settle this case, even if we lose them tonight and can't prove they're cheating. I shook my head and said that the conversation I had overheard earlier was enough for me. 20 minutes later, Sandra's garage door opened and she drove out. We easily followed her. 20 minutes later, Sandra's garage door opened and she drove out. We easily followed her. The women had no idea that they could be being followed, and therefore probably did not look around. Most likely, they were discussing the upcoming evening. I bet they wouldn't even spend much time drinking. They didn't have to seduce anyone or even play seduction. Their goal was only sex, and as much as possible. I called Dawn and E to keep them in the loop. They were already on their way. Sandra pulled into the parking lot of a fairly quiet bar that we all knew, a quiet place known as a pickup bar. There was some music, but mostly you sat, drank, and talked. They decided whether the interlocutor was someone worth making acquaintance with. If not, then go home or wait for the next one. No one gave anyone a second glance unless they were considering a future date. Damn, Christine looks hot, and Sandra too, Jason remarked as he watched him and Sandra get out of the car. From our position, we could see both women adjusting their tight dresses. The dresses are maybe a couple of inches below their butts, but no more. I wonder if they wear bras. I shook my head. I knew Christine didn't wear it. She couldn't wear it with a dress like that. I bet they don't have any panties on either unless it's a thong, I said roughly. And then it would be easy to put on a short show for your boy toys before they get down to business. Don and Ed arrived. They came over and I told them what the women were wearing. We watched as several men arrived and went inside. We had no idea if it was Eric and Richard. I didn't want to go inside too early and ruin the surprise. Ed said he would go and see if the women were sitting alone or not. Both he and Don wore baseball caps. I hoped Christine wouldn't recognize them too soon. He called from inside and said that he barely had time to grab a beer when two guys sat down next to the women. They kissed women as if they were going to have sex right there in the bar. He told us where they were sitting. He quickly finished his beer and went outside to help Don identify the guys' cars. He stayed close by in case we needed help. When we got inside, Jason and I took out our phones and started filming the scene. Without saying anything, we approached the four and for several seconds filmed how they pressed themselves against each other, intertwining their hands. Sandra looked up and squealed when she saw us. "Hello, beauties," I said much louder than necessary. The look on Christine's face was priceless. She started babbling something. "Carry on, bitch," I announced loudly. There was silence in the bar. "Don't pay attention to me, and don't bother returning home. I'll gather up your junk and put it out on the lawn tonight. You can drag him to this other trader's house. With my free hand, I pointed at Sandra, and you guys can keep them after you have your fun today. I don't need her anymore. I'm sure Sandra's husband won't want to see her either when he finds out about this." One of them began to rise to his feet. "Do not be an idiot." I turned slightly and showed him the handle of my Glock above my belt line. Even in the dim lighting, he paled noticeably. Jason and I turned and walked out. I wondered how long it would be before I received my first phone call or message. 10 minutes. Yes, what do you want? Is the guy done playing with you? I asked sarcastically. I put it on speaker so Jason could enjoy himself. Damn it, said Christine. It's not what it seems. These guys came to town on business. One of them is Sandra's old friend. She needed someone as cover. I couldn't believe what she told me. It's not what it seems. That's probably all they could come up with in 10 minutes. I laughed. Yes, one of the guy's arms was so far around your neck that he could reach your tit. His other hand was under the table. I wonder if it was under your dress too. I can't tell from the video, but it does not matter. You lied, you cheated, we're done. I heard Jerry, please, as I pressed the icon to end the call. You know I'm going home with you tonight, Jason said. I looked at him in surprise. Don't argue about it. You've been running on adrenaline for the past few hours, fueled by anger. You behaved quite normally, although a little nervously. Soon you will fail, and it will hurt you. I'll be there so you don't do anything stupid and fall apart. I quietly told him I appreciated it. He handed me his phone and told me to go into his contacts and call his wife. What the hell was she thinking? Sue, Jason's wife, shouted into the phone. I turned on the speakerphone. Is she cheating? Throw all her things out into the yard and lock the door. I had no choice but to laugh. Thanks, Sue, I said. I'm glad you have my back. I appreciate it. I would do the same to Jason if he cheated on me, Sue said. And if I cheated on him, I would know that the same or even worse could be expected from him. Jason, stay with Jerry today and help him. Maybe you guys should consider taking a few days off and going to a fish camp and getting drunk as soon as you pull yourself together. I loved my daughter-in-law. Okay, first about the main thing. Whiskey, tequila, rum, or beer? Jason asked as we pulled up to my house. I replied that beer is safer. He brought 2 bottles and put a few more in the refrigerator to cool. Well, let's start packing her things, he asked, grinning. I knew that in the end it wouldn't matter. I probably wouldn't be able to keep her on the street. I didn't care about the house anyway, but it would be a statement, and I planned to make this statement as public as possible. We took a box with garbage bags and began to put all her things in it, starting with clothes. We began to stack them in the yard, not far from the front of the house. This was done so that I would not be accused of giving away her things. Where we lived, if you put things out on the side of the road, it was considered safe to pick them up. Often, during breaks between garbage collection, you could find household appliances and old TV or something else on the side of the road. Sofas and chairs were placed there when the apartment was renovated. It was generally accepted that these things were given away. Anyone who wanted could take them. This eliminated the need to go to the landfill and provided an opportunity for those in need. I put Christine's things next to the house. I told her it would be outside and hoped I would be covered. An hour later, all of Christine's clothes and personal belongings lay on the lawn. I changed the combination on my gun safe and kept all the documentation I wanted to protect. I went into my home office to make sure there was nothing there that couldn't be replaced. I knew it would be difficult for me to hold Christine liable for damages if she threw away something important after she got the house. She drove up with Sandra. "Are you seriously going to throw my things out of the house?" she screamed. I nodded. It was already about 9 o'clock. We started our adventure early. I reached towards the door and grabbed the air horn I had from my fishing and boating supplies. I started honking. After several loud beeps, neighbors appeared from nearby houses. They immediately realized that something unusual was happening. A few people had cell phones in their hands in case things got really interesting, but everyone stood and watched. I went out into the open, almost onto the street. My wife Christine and her friend Sandra were meeting guys and having wild, unbridled sex. I announced in a loud and firm voice. I heard Christine start crying and begging behind me. Tonight I caught them both at the bar with their boyfriends. If anyone needs proof, I'll be happy to show them the video footage. I want this woman out of my house. She can go live with her friend. I'll move out in the next few days and she can come back. We're finished. I waved cordially. How could you do this? Christine asked, not believing that I had the nerve to make such a public statement. Sandra understood perfectly well what this meant for herself. She knew that if I hadn't already done so, I would soon call her husband. She sat on the lawn and sobbed. She was only married to Bob for a couple of years, but they had a prenup. Knowing her history, I took him aside and warned him to be on the safe side. Trust, but verify, I said. He took my advice. You don't have any evidence that we did anything, Sandra said, trying to sound confident. Well, we sat at the bar with a couple of friends. Big deal. I pointed to the bags and said that it was better to put them away. Otherwise, they might go missing. I honestly expected the police to show up soon. And sure enough, a patrol car pulled up. While all this was happening, Jason was in my office, making sure the contents of both his and mine were uploaded to the cloud. I was busy explaining to the cops how I caught my wife cheating. The question was, who would leave home today? One of the employees said that it is usually a man. I said that I would be happy to, but my wife's things were already packed. He grinned, knowing that I was filming him. Now I'm not sure that my wife won't smash or destroy my property. I have a home office where confidential data from my work is stored. So if you want me to go to her place, I want to be able to secure my things. A police sergeant was called. I repeated my position. With difficulty keeping a straight face, he turned to Christine. Ma'am, do you have somewhere to go tonight, and where to leave your things for the night? She nodded with tears in her eyes. I thought the cops would laugh when I offered to help Christine carry her things in garbage bags down the street to Sandra's house. Half the neighbors were now watching the show. Several people came to help, hoping to hear the whole story. Please, can we talk? Kristen asked plaintively. I replied that maybe in a day or two. With all the activity in my house, Eric and Richard thought they got away with it. This was not the case. Ed and Don watched them as they followed Jason and me outside and watched us drive away. Turning to Christine and Sandra, they kissed them goodbye, but did not caress them, since they were probably being watched by other patrons of the bar. Both men walked to their cars and watched as Christine and Sandra got into Sandra's car. Thanks to the delay, Ed and Don had enough time to remember not only the license plates, but also the make and model of the cars. They even filmed the men kissing the women goodbye. They then proceeded to houses believed to be their own. The make and model of the cars. They even filmed the men kissing the women goodbye. They then proceeded to houses believed to be their own. Ed and Don called Jason to see how we were doing. He told them to come to our house. We sat and laughed at what we had learned. Ed watched me carefully. Finally, I looked at him and asked, "What?" "Dude, you're about to go crazy." "I'll stick around to make sure you don't kill anyone," he offered. I was with Don when he went through it. My brother Jason said he said the same thing. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked, starting to get seriously angry. "Dude, I was where you are now, just like Ed said," Don said quietly. "I spent several days crying in my beer, thinking about what I had lost, and I was where you are now, just like Ed said," Don said quietly. I spent several days crying in my beer, thinking about what I had lost and feeling sorry for myself before I realized how angry I was. I wasn't sure who I was more, angry at myself for being stupid or my wife and her lover for cheating. Definitely on them. I could barely contain the definitely on them. I could barely contain the urge to kill them. Don laughed at the memory. It took a few days, but I started to feel bad for not paying attention and not seeing the signs for so long. I felt like an idiot. "And what did you do?" I asked. I suspected there was much more to the story than they admitted. "Nothing. Just divorce that bitch," Don said with a half smile. "Well, I let the guy's wife know." Ed started giggling. I looked at him. Now I knew there was more to the story. "This is our official history," Ed said. Don lied, and I swore to it. "Sorry, Don, but Jerry needs to hear this." Don smiled and told him to continue. We started a small campaign against this scumbag on the side. The guy, of course, knew that Crystal was married. "Sorry, Don, we try not to use her name. Her new name is Traitor. That's what we call her." He offered by way of explanation. A day later, the guy got his ass. He never saw who did it. He did not need medical attention, just a handful of ice to relieve the swelling. In general, even after his wife found out that he was cheating on her and divorced him, taking him to the cleaners, the guy continued to have all sorts of troubles. His garden house, where he kept his equipment, caught fire. Taking him to the cleaners, the guy continued to have all sorts of troubles. His garden house, where he kept his equipment, caught fire. His tires often punctured. He couldn't even go to a bar without someone hitting him. And when he fell, he received several blows to the balls. He was very unlucky. His boss knew he was a fraud and didn't fire him, but said he was on probation. When he tried to change jobs, this story followed him. That is, it was just bad luck. You know, Ed said. So what happened to him? I asked. He moved to Georgia, tried to start over, Don said. It's funny, but a month or so later, his new boss found out why he left Louisiana. It seems they don't like guys having fun with their coworkers any more than we do. He's had a rough couple of years. Are you really messing around with him for that long? I asked. Neither man ever told me about this. It looks like you had to work hard to get rid of him. Hey, everyone should have their own hobby. Don laughed. I mean, I still fish and hunt, but I'm not married, so I have a lot of free time at night. The clock keeps asking me to do something, unless of course there is a good movie on. Of course, Ed offered, tell him about her punishment. Yeah, it looks like she's having a hard time finding a permanent boyfriend. I mean more than 2 dates, Don said. Guys may like wild things in the bedroom, but few people like to hear their mothers outraged by receiving video footage of his new girlfriend and her potential sister-in-law having fun with a couple of guys. And all her colleagues have copies of her antics. Don laughed, especially the wives of her male colleagues. They are understandably concerned. I started laughing. Now I regret that I didn't realize, I said, wiping away tears from laughing so hard. I'm missing out on this fun. Don shrugged. It was fun, but I think it's time to move on. Although this bitch will always guess, this requires a lot of effort. Of course, she knows who is behind her problems. A few months ago, she asked me what she could do to get me to stop. I was very careful not to give myself away and let her set me up. She would have sued me to death. That's why I never confessed to you guys. Only Ade knew. We laughed. I began to wonder what I could do. Let's think before we act, Ed suggested. You worked quickly. I mean, it's only been 7 hours or so since you found out about all this. The others agreed. Jason reported that his wife, Sue, had talked about taking the time to go to our fish camp and have a drink. The camp technically belonged to our father, but Jason and I used it whenever we wanted. Hell yes, Ed stated. I know my wife will agree with this, especially if I bring a bunch of fish. Yeah, plus she might get a chance to join Christine and her friend while we're in the swamp. Don laughed, teasing his friend. Nope, not with our prenup. Ed grinned back. She'll have to divorce me first to get anything. Now, I feel bad for not protecting myself, I admitted. I knew that Christine's 2 closest friends were sluts in round heels. I should have thought about this. All 3 told me that we all make mistakes. Next time, I'll know better. Finally, we went to bed. I lay there for a while and wondered if I could sleep. Then I realized that conversations with friends helped me more than a group of consultants. I felt better. I turned over on my back a group of consultants. I felt better. I turned over on my back and closed my eyes. I fell asleep. I woke up refreshed. I didn't even have a hangover. Christine wanted to talk the next day. I asked her why. She approached me mid-morning. I told her that I would only talk to her in the yard and not behind a closed door. I had a phone in my pocket that was recording. She tried to explain how my coming to the bar kept her from doing stupid things. How many times before have you had fun with them, or with their other friend Brian, for example, I asked. She looked at me with wide eyes. She realized that I knew much more about her activities than what I had seen in the bar the previous evening. She stammered for a few seconds, but didn't answer. I have good news and bad news, I offered with a smile. She looked at me hopefully. The good news is that I paid off the credit card before I canceled it. I also paid my utility bills, so they're fine for the next month. Plus, I paid off all our loans. We are debt-free. The bad news is we have about $700 left between savings and the check. I took off my half, I said. She looked at me in horror. I shrugged. Some of these bills were long-term bills that we paid off like bills on a car. Both cars were registered in our names. If she couldn't or wouldn't make the payments, I knew the banks would come after me to pay them off. Well, you still have a few options, I said. You and Sandra can move in with your lovers or with Tammy. I'm pretty sure Bob is going to kick her out as part of the prenup they made, and I intend to immediately put our house up for sale. The realtor is the second call I plan to make on Monday. The first one is to the lawyer. Can't we talk about this? Christine said pitifully. What is there to talk about? I asked. I tried my best to remain calm. My heart was breaking, but anger took over. You are the one who decided to play pranks. Of course, you knew what would happen when I found out. Of course, you never thought that I would do this. But like I said, you have a choice. Christine looked at me like she had swallowed a baseball. Of course, this could get complicated if one of them is married, I added. I have not yet received a report on their personal life. I'm waiting for him to tell their wives if they have any. They are married, they have children, Christine gasped. You can't ruin their lives. And why is this a problem? I asked, trying to make my voice sound as reasonable as possible. They didn't care about their marriages or mine. So as far as I'm concerned, all the dirty laundry gets dumped on the floor, and everyone sees it for what it is, every spot. Now, if you don't have anything worthwhile, why don't you go back to Sandra's house? She started to walk away and then turned around. Did you call Bob? She asked. I realized that this was one of the questions Sandra wanted to know when Christine returned. I smiled and nodded. Of course, I told Bob. I did this last night before I got drunk. I brought him up to date and relayed Don's suggestions about getting the finances sorted out first. Bob didn't have as much debt as I did, but he paid off and canceled his credit cards and took 75% of the available cash as required by the marriage contract. He, like me, knew that Sandra would not be able to return the money once she withdrew it from the account. Her measly part-time job barely allowed her to drink wine and go out to dinner occasionally. Bob called me back in the morning to see what I had done and to let me know that he would be back in town late in the morning. I was busy transferring money and was half drunk when we spoke last night. His anger and resentment were palpable. He really loved Sandra. Last year, he told me privately that he felt guilty about asking for a prenup, but he signed it anyway when I insisted. Last night, he reminded me of that conversation and said that he was now glad he listened to me. I told him to get home safely and we would figure it out together. I watched Christine walk towards Sandra's house. She looked depressed. Her shoulders slumped as she shuffled forward. Of course, these women could emerge victorious and take back their lives. They were beauties. It was only necessary to become professionals, not amateurs. Online was a great option if you didn't become a call girl. They could earn a decent, if not very good, living. I regretted not telling Christine a few minutes ago. I'll have to remember this phrase for the future. I showed my middle finger to the retreating figure. One parting shot. I was thinking about what Don said last night, about how everyone needs to have a hobby, and his hobby was making fun of his ex and her boyfriend. I didn't have the information to do anything about any of these three guys yet, but I knew where Christine was vulnerable. Was it cruel, even unjustified? Yes, but I did it anyway. I took out my mobile phone. Hello, Miss Sullivan. I greeted the woman who answered. Since when do you call me Miss Sullivan? She asked. No, since you started dating Christine. I have always been a mother. Well, that's the problem, I said. I love you. You have always been by my. Well, that's the problem, I said. I love you. You have always been by my side, but everything has changed. I want you to know that Christine and I are getting a divorce. To say that the almost 50-year-old woman was shocked would be an understatement. What? She exclaimed. A week ago, you told me that you decided to have a child. Well, that was before I found out that Christine was cheating on me, I said. She and her friends, Sandra and Tammy, dated 3 guys whenever possible. From what I heard, it was a sex festival with no limits. Christine goes there whenever I'm at my fishing camp. She refuses to go there with me and instead entertains one of these guys. Miss Sullivan asked if I was sure. I have an audio recording, and last night I followed her to a bar. Her behavior at the bar certainly didn't pass the husband test. In fact, her behavior would be unacceptable in most bars in town, I said. I have a video recording. What a stupid bitch, Miss Sullivan grumbled. I thought she left her wild ways behind when she married you. She said it was true. She started crying. Please stay close, Jerry. I have to go. She hung up. I felt ashamed that I had hurt this sweet woman, but at the same time, I didn't want Christine to recount our family history and make me look like the bad guy. 30 minutes later, an angry Christine called me. How dare you, you son of a bitch, she shouted. What? I asked innocently. You know, how could you tell my mother that I was a fool, she shouted. Isn't this true? I asked. She called me a few more names and hung up. Bob appeared. He didn't even bother to stop by his house. He wanted to talk to me first. After we talked and he had copies of my audio file and the video of Sandra locking lips with a man whose hands seemed to be in places they shouldn't be, we went to his house. I'm here to get my things, or at least clothes for a few days, he announced. Sandra looked from Bob to me and back again. He took out his mobile phone. If anything is damaged, destroyed, or otherwise tampered with, I will file criminal charges against you. Let this serve as notice, he warned. He walked around the house and took videos. I didn't think about it. I took out my mobile phone. Christine, I go home and film our apartment. If anything is subsequently destroyed or stolen, I will file criminal charges against you, including if you let your lover into your house and he causes damage. I had no idea if it was legal, but the result was excellent. Christine sat and sobbed. I doubt it would have occurred to her to destroy anything on her own, but I wasn't going to risk it. 24 wars ago, I could not even think that she would cheat on me. Bob grabbed a few days' worth of clothes, and we took them to my house. You know, I really thought Sandra had changed. She told me several times that she was a libertine. Well, as she described it, quite wild. But now all that was behind her. She wanted to be my loving wife and mother to my children. I feel like such a fool. A few months ago, she even stopped taking pills. Shit, I hope she's not pregnant. Of course, I would do a DNA test. But even if I were the father, I would still be bombarded with child support. I told him not to worry about it until it happened. Don, Ed, and Jason showed up with a couple cases of beer. So everything can be cured with beer, right? I asked. No, it just makes everything a little more bearable, Don replied. I told them what I did to Christine. Don laughed and congratulated me. With my help, Bob did something similar and covered his ass. His debt was smaller, but now it was gone, and he transferred his share to another account. Jason laughed, saying that with the money now sitting in his checking account, he could take an extended trip and spend a few weeks in Cabo. Bob and I needed an account we could put money into. I didn't have many of them, but he did. We couldn't open an account last night, so we transferred the money to Jason's account. My brother punched out the license plates of the cars. Officially, of course, he cannot say anything. But I have names and addresses, Don said. I told them that Christine said the guys were married and had children. Well, before I drink too much, I want to see what I can find out about Wivs, I said. Bob, I'm in the mood for a little scorched earth retribution. What about you? He grinned back and took out his laptop. Finding Eric and Richard was easier than I expected. Both had Facebook profiles with photos of their wives and children. Their wives were on their contact lists. Finding out the mobile phone number of each woman turned out to be as easy as shelling peers. Each man had several contacts named Brian, and this pair was shared. We didn't want to notify the innocent man's wife. I called and introduced myself, innocent man's wife. I called and introduced myself to Richard's wife. I quickly got to the point. I explained the whole situation. To say the woman was angry would be an understatement. He's cheated before. She was comfortable letting him go out with two friends because she believed it would keep him from cheating, at least in those moments. Let me guess, Brian is one of these friends, but last night he was unavailable. Do you know his wife? She knew. I asked if she would like to meet, and I would give her a copy of the audio file I had, as well as the video I took the night before. She definitely wanted to meet as soon as possible. I suggested that she call Eric's wife, and she said she would do so, as well as Brian's wife, and call me back to set up a meeting. 15 minutes later, she called me. I was amazed at the speed. She told me she wasn't going to waste any time. I made copies of the notes for both women. We met at a local cafe. Bob and I were sitting and standing when 3 women in casual clothes came inside. The women looked to be about 30 years old, several years older than us. They wore minimal makeup, but each of them was very beautiful. I offered to buy them coffee, and they agreed. I played them the original recordings. So this has been going on for a while, said Kathleen, Richard's wife. I told them I had no idea how the men met our wives. They had never seen Sandra or Christina before. I opened Tammy's photo. Brian's wife recognized her. She works with Brian, Tori, or something like that. I saw her at company events. I guess that's where it all started. She and Brian had an affair that developed into full-fledged dates with other women. I explained that I was going to file for divorce as soon as possible, and what Bob and I had done with our finances. I saw their gears move. Well, I'm going to do some shopping before heading home, Richard's wife announced. There is a dress in one boutique that I have my eye on. Maybe I'll find some dresses. A woman I know bought several items and then returned them for cash. Maybe I'll dress up and ask Richard if I look as good as Christine and Sandra last night when he walks in the door, just before I tell him to get the hell out. He'll know something's up when Eric comes home and finds his things on the lawn this afternoon. I'm sure Eric will call him as soon as he arrives. Even before he enters the house, Eric's wife said. I told her that I had packed Christine's clothes. I might pack it just to help take it outside, but then I'll throw it all away. I'll just throw away his suits. I like your idea of a horn to alert neighbors. You say they can be bought in the fishing department of any store. I nodded. Bob and I laughed openly. We better get started. They are playing golf this afternoon and will be home around 6. I wonder how many of those golf trips were spent with these women playing with their balls and clubs instead. Another round of laughter. I wondered how long this anger would last before the sobbing started. These women were tough, but I remembered what Dawn said. That's what I said. We have already discussed this among ourselves, after I caught Richard the first time. We even insisted that we all sign a prenuptial agreement, not too one-sided, but containing serious sanctions, said Kathleen. We had sort of a hypothetical plan to support each other and how we would crucify our husbands for helping or covering up if one of the other guys had an affair. Now we know they are all involved. Our children are already in their teens. They will find out about it today. They are already quite old. The other woman nodded. We said goodbye, exchanging phone numbers. It seems these 3 decided that using 3 women together would be easier to hide. I'd never heard where they met. I'm guessing mostly from Tammy. They thought they had everything under control. Bob noted, "Thank God your car needed repairs and you didn't sit and wait." Back at my house, we spent the rest of the day drinking beer. For dinner, we had to order food since neither of us could drive. Sandra called Bob. He turned on the speakerphone. Why did you need to get Tammy and Brian involved? They weren't even there last night, she wailed. All 3 of their wives are threatening divorce, and Brian's wife says she's going to report this to Brian's boss. Tammy called Yusel upset because she could be fired right then and there. I couldn't resist. I started giggling. Let me ask you something, Bob said. We had a bet that you girls mostly met at Tammy's house for your little sex fest. Motel rooms were to become quite expensive and quite limited in space. Sandra muttered something but did not confirm or deny. Well, Tammy is still in deep trouble. It's a pity. She deserved what she got. The next week's action went as we expected. Bob and I hired the same lawyer. We used the services of the person who drafted his marriage contract. Christine and Sandra were served at work midweek. Both houses were put up for sale. We listed our homes for sale with the same agent. We explained the circumstances and said that although we knew we did not have much capital, we were going to negotiate a sale so that we would not have large out-of-pocket expenses. I have often heard that any endeavor is 90% preparation and 10% execution. Divorce is the same thing. Once we got everything moving, our part of the job was almost complete. Then everything was decided by the lawyers. I found a small apartment. It was not difficult to divide furniture and other common property. Most of the things went to separate warehouses. We sold the rest for cash to a real estate company. 7 years later, Sandra, Christine, and Tammy are roommates again. After losing her job, Tammy was unable to pay her rent on her own. She seemed to have a hard time finding another job as good as the one she lost. Her new boss somehow heard the story that she and her roommates were sluts. Each of Christine's coworkers knew what she had done to destroy her marriage. Her work seemed to have stalled, but I bet men were lining up to have some fun, despite the watchful eyes of their wives. Sandra's job at the mall was not enough to support her without outside help. Bob and I followed the girls' relationships for about a year after our divorce. We took a page from Don's hobby book and let any man one of them dated more than twice know all about them. In the end, we got tired of it. Brian was fired at the same time as Tammy. I heard he had some good job prospects. He needed her, of course. His minimum child support and alimony were set according to his post-nuptial agreement. Although I sympathized with his family, his new boss and coworkers quickly learned the details of why he had lost his previous position. He was not a happy camper and was treated like an outcast. Richard and Eric weren't doing much better, although they still had jobs. Bob and I were happy to remain single for now. I was only 29 and in no hurry to get married again. True, I had several prospects. One of the best was the younger sister of one of Jason's colleagues. I met her at a barbecue party at Jason's house. I knew it was a setup. We dated several times and seemed to be compatible in and out of bed. She took up quite a lot of my free time, and I weakened my role in the campaign against the 6 traitors. We both hypothetically agreed to a prenuptial agreement if we ever became serious about marriage. She didn't think it was necessary, as she said one afternoon at the fishing camp. If my husband ever cheated on me, I would feed his ass to the alligators, my sassy little girl. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.